that are going to speak are four, and we are gonna start from Ria Ranalder. She's the project manager and analyst at RAN 21, and she will be speaking about renewables and the European Green Deal, the status, challenges, and perspectives. And so I will give her the word. And Elia, you can start sharing your screen. So let me know if you're able to.
Thank you, Monica, for the very kind introduction. And it's nice to be here. Very glad I can participate in this, and I hope I can provide some input to the discussion. So let me share my screen. Hold on.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us.
I am not finding it.
There should be a share the screen button on the bottom.
Yeah, I have that. I just need to find my own presentation on the availabilities there. Let me just try. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Apologies.
No worries.
There we go.
Perfect.
So I hope you can now see my presentation and my screen with way too many tabs open.
Yes, we see the presentation.
Great. Okay. Okay. Is it? Where is? I somehow. Okay. Okay. So let me start with. Monica already gave the introduction to what I'll be speaking about. Maybe as a quick word about me, I'm a project manager and I lead RAN 21's work on cities, on renewables in cities. Also with a specific focus on policies, on across our work and citizen participation and heating and cooling in buildings. So for those of you who do not know RAN 21, we are a renewable energy policy network based out of Paris. The goal is to really bring different communities and stakeholders together to make the shift to renewables happen now. Our community is more than 2,000 people, and our reports are probably the world's most comprehensive and crowdsourced reports on renewables. So there tend to be hundreds of people involved in how we get our data, and I'll speak a bit more about that in the end. So before I dive into the European Green Deal, I first want to pose that really general question, which is, why do we even need an energy transition? Why is this even necessary? Why do we need more renewables? We keep hearing about these record deals. It's in the news of how, massive growth of renewables over the last years. We hear about record installations. Just alone last year, there were a record of 200 gigawatts installed, bringing the total capacity up to over 2,500 gigawatts of installed capacity. But, and there's a massive but, is we keep speaking about the power sector. And that's where renewables are strong. So more than 26% of our power comes from renewables. But as this graph shows you, more than 80% of the energy that we consume actually comes from heating, cooling, and transport. And that's where renewables are lagging behind. So you see the little yellow squares, the share of renewables in heating, cooling, and transport is much lower. And one of the reasons for that is that there's a lack of policy support for heating and cooling and transport. There is generally policies and targets do remain most ambitious and most numerous in the power sector, and that's where renewables are also strongest, with the heating and cooling targets and transport targets lagging behind. And we see very little change here happening at the national level. Very few policies being added over the last years, so kind of flattening out of that curve here. So that may be just to set this overall frame of we do need more policy support for renewables, and that's why anything that we can get to make that happen is great news. So an European Green Deal, referred to as Europe's man on the moon moment, is really an important step. I guess you spoke about it a little bit already before what it is. I mean, it's this framework and a set of framework and policies to really achieve this overarching target of getting the European Union to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, with an intermediate target of 50% cut of emissions by 2030, 50 to 55. And also incentives to encourage more investment from the private sector, and really action plans to not only make it about energy, but also about preserving biodiversity and preserving natural habitats, among other things. So I want to ask that question, is it really a man on the moon moment? In my opinion, it is. I mean, I'm coming from a global perspective, of course, you know, we work globally, but the EU is, of course, always, I mean, I'm based in the EU. I have a bachelor in European studies, so I know the EU legislation quite well. But, you know, how is this really a man of the moon moment? Is this really true? Like, I think it is a great first step to acknowledging, first of all, that we need to make climate action a priority. The EU is responsible for around 9% of all emissions. So you could say, well, that's not a lot, but it also acknowledges that there are historic emissions that happened in the EU. And it also, there is this leadership aspect. If the EU goes ahead, other countries will follow. It also acknowledges that the EU, that the economy will need to get overhauled from energy consumption to food consumption to transport and manufacturing. And it also acknowledges that it is necessary for this transition to be just. So to be fair among member states, that there is a need to support member states that are lagging behind and that are having structural issues with this transition. So of course there are weaknesses, and I will focus on the energy weaknesses for this purpose. It is a positive first step, but there has been a lot of criticism on the influence of fossil fuel industry companies on making this deal, on lobbying for this, for certain aspects. I guess one of the biggest downsides is that a comprehensive plan of how to actually achieve this will only be added later. This 2030 goal, so 50 to 55% cutting of emissions by 2030, the irony is this is not even in line with the Paris Agreement. This is not ambitious enough that the EU can achieve its Paris Agreement target. And also that the transport sector is not properly addressed. So there's no idea of how to curb growth of the aviation industry. There is no commitment to only going to having zero emission cars. And there is a massive investment gap. Then money that is dedicated to this does not even come close to the funding that is actually needed. So the money that is has been said is needed is 300 billion euros per year. So it does not even come close. And it has been criticized, this Just Transition Fund has also been criticized by some member states in saying it rewards these countries that didn't go green earlier. So it is dedicating specific money to these countries that have put the energy transition on hold, that are still heavily investing in fossil fuels. And then as a last point, and this is more a question, is how will this deal with the backlash from citizens? We have seen here in France, the Gilets jaunes movement, so the yellow vests, that has been sparked because of increased taxes for diesel cars. So it is really, how will this be incorporated and how will this be addressed? And the narrative shifted, so it's really about the positive things. So we had this European Green Deal late 2019, early 2020, and then COVID happened. So many countries, so really the focus on the Green Deal kind of diminished. Many countries believe that, you know, the focus should be on more immediate short-term action to deal with the crisis rather than a climate change strategy. So in May 2020, the European countries and the Commission put forward this recovery package where the European Green Deal kind of was folded into. So this next generation EU plan committing 1.8 trillion to a green recovery. Lots of splash, lots of announcements, and has been a massive media hype, so to say, around this. So 750 billion for an emergency fund, and then 1 trillion for the new budget of the European Union for 2021 to 27. So with the goal to really have a sustainable, fair, even, and inclusive recovery for all member states. So again, I think major step for the EU, given that this is the first time they will make use of borrowing to fund grants. There is this 30% climate target and this do not harm principle across the entire EU budget. Okay, but 30% climate target across the entire EU budget. What is going to happen with the entire other 70%? So that means we can push the other 70% in whatever we want to. That's not really that ambitious. So again, it has been criticized that the ambition isn't really high enough. And then it has been also criticized for the fact that it is kind of reshuffling already existing funds to come to this 1.8 trillion euros. And then as a last point, and I'm mentioning this here, and I'm really curious to hear the other presentations afterwards, is this criticism of the hydrogen strategy. So there has been this launch of the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. Who is on that? It is the who is who of the gas industry. Very little support, like very little to no support from NGOs, from civil society organizations, and so on. And there has been double investment in funds for hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. And this is really, it has had this focus on green hydrogen while acknowledging that fossil fuel-based hydrogen is still necessary. So it is kind of, instead of having this big focus that was on acknowledging that the entire economy needs to change, it is in a way still keeping the business model of the fossil fuel industry intact, and has a real risk of locking us in a fossil fueled future. And I think what summarizes this hydrogen debate quite well is something that the REN21 executive director said a couple weeks ago is, don't think about the roof and then stop building the house's foundation. There is no clean hydrogen without renewable power. We need renewable power to produce clean hydrogen. Currently, 95% of hydrogen is produced using fossil fuels. So this is just as a summary of where the Green Deal and the Next Generation EU plan is headed. We've heard a lot of positive splash on national level announcements. We are going to go green. So as a last thing, I want to look in, is it just talking or is it actually action? And REN21 has been part of a consortium looking at recovery packages, and surprise, surprise, more than 50% of energy-related recovery is going into fossil fuels. That means also, in addition, bailing out aviation industry, supporting fossil fuel companies and bailing them out, and only 35% of the public money is dedicated to renewables. And this is a bit of a, this is an irony on the one hand, and then also a massive missed opportunity. So much money going into this recovery, and it is an opportunity to make renewables alongside energy efficiency, of course, as part of, as core of how we rethink and reposition ourselves. And maybe just as a reminder, and I think we tend to speak about renewable energy as a solution for tackling climate change, but it's not only about this. Yes, it's great. We can mitigate climate change using renewables, but it is much more. And I think this argument is especially important when we go above and beyond the EU. There are a lot of other co-benefits that are stronger in how we, and more convincing in how we communicate about renewables. Renewables can support with clean air and a healthy living environment. It can provide local economic opportunities. It can provide decent jobs. There is, the jobs in renewables have been growing, and there is also this possibility of transferring skills from fossil fuels to renewables. It allows for an affordable and inclusive energy transition. And it also can support countries, cities, and people with energy security and sovereignty. And I think that's why we really need to have renewables at the core of this, of a Green Deal and how we move forward. And as a very last thing, I promised you in the beginning that these reports are, or how we work, is very collaborative. So I just want to make you aware of an opportunity to get engaged. I think it is always really important that we have, if we want to take good decisions, we need really good data. And for good data, we at REN21 believe we need the power of many, and we need an experience of an expert community. So right now we're collecting data for our cities report. Everybody is invited to participate, to provide data, to provide success stories of renewables in cities, and really help shaping this transition to renewables. And I'll stop here, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation.